It was past midnight when Clara Reynolds stepped barefoot onto the gravel road, her small feet bleeding with every step. The woods behind her whispered with every gust of wind, each sound a cruel reminder of where she had just escaped. Her oversized t-shirt clung to her body, soaked in sweat and fear. She didn't know where she was, only that she had to keep moving. The night was cold, the moon hidden behind clouds. Her breath was shaky, visible in the dark air. Every branch crackling behind her made her flinch, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Somewhere back there, behind locked doors and stained walls, he might have noticed she was gone. She couldn't let him find her. Not again. She remembered her brother's voice from years ago, soft and reassuring. "Look up at the stars, Clara. If you ever get lost, just follow the sky." So she did. She followed the sky. Through thorns, over hills, along forgotten roads. She was 11, alone, afraid. And yet she walked, because something deep inside her had decided, this is not where I die. This is the story of a child who refused to be a victim and walked through the dark to find the light. Before we go deeper, subscribe now and turn on the bell, because here we tell the stories no one else dares to. Real, raw, unforgettable. Be part of a community that feels, protects, and remembers. Don't miss what might change the way you see the world. Before everything changed, Clara Reynolds was just a quiet girl from a quiet street in a small Missouri town. She was 11, curious, soft-spoken, and always drawing animals in her notebooks. Her dream was to become a veterinarian, not because she liked science, but because animals didn't yell, lie, or leave. She lived with her mother, Amy, a nurse who worked long overnight shifts to keep the lights on. Clara didn't blame her. She knew her mother was doing her best, but loneliness had become a silent roommate in their home, especially after Tyler, her older brother, died in a car accident 2 years earlier. Tyler had been everything to her. Protector, best friend, the one who taught her how to ride a bike and made her laugh when their mom came home too tired to smile. Since Tyler's death, Clara had changed. She stopped talking as much, started drawing darker things, storms, wolves, eyes. She became someone who listened more than she spoke. At school, she kept to herself. At home, she filled the silence with headphones and daydreamed. One night on a gaming app, Clara met someone who called themselves Sky. Sky was kind. Sky said all the right things. They liked her drawings. They remembered things she said. They asked if she was okay. No one had asked her that in a long time. Clara didn't know Sky was not who they claimed to be. She didn't know that someone could wear kindness like a costume, that someone could study your wounds just to make them worse. To her, Sky was a lifeline. Someone finally saw her. Someone finally made her feel like she mattered. And when they said, "Let's meet, just for a little while. I want to give you something," Clara believed it was safe. She believed she could trust them, because when you're 11 and full of broken pieces, you don't always see the cracks in others. That was the last normal day of Clara Reynolds' life. Clara wanted to be seen, not in the loud, attention-seeking way other kids craved, but in the quiet, desperate way of someone who had felt invisible for too long. She didn't want the spotlight, just a voice that said, "I hear you." A heart that whispered, "You matter." Sky gave her that. It started with casual chats during online matches, then longer conversations, private messages, shared photos. Sky told Clara they were also 11, also lonely, also missing someone. Sky talked about a sister who had died, about a mom who worked too much. Their stories lined up like puzzle pieces. Clara felt connected, finally, completely. For weeks, she came home from school and went straight to her room, logging in to talk to Sky. It became the best part of her day. Sky told jokes. Sky asked questions. Sky remembered her dog's name and the way she liked to draw unicorns with scars. Clara told them about Tyler, about how sometimes she still talked to his empty bed. Sky didn't laugh. Sky said, Me too. Indeed, when Sky said they wished they could hang out in real life, Clara's heart skipped. It felt innocent, sweet even. I want to give you something, Sky messaged one evening. It's not big, just something I made for you. A drawing. It reminded me of what you told me about your brother. Clara stared at the message for a long time. No one had ever drawn something for her before. Her mom barely noticed the sketches piling up in her notebooks. Sky said they'd leave the drawing in a small park near Clara's house, tucked behind an old oak tree. I won't be there, they said. It's just a surprise drop-off. Clara knew it was against the rules. Her mom had told her not to meet people online, but this wasn't a meeting. It was just a walk to the park, just a gift, just someone who cared. She waited until her mom left for her shift, then slipped on a hoodie and crept out the back door. The park was quiet. Still. Moonlight spilled through the branches. There was no drawing, just a man. He smiled when he saw her, but it wasn't the smile Sky used in the emojis. Something about it felt wrong. Too wide. Too calm. Clara froze. Are you Clara? He asked. She didn't answer. She took a step back. That's when he reached out and everything inside her screamed too late. Clara turned to run, but he was faster. His hand closed around her arm like a trap, yanking her backward. She screamed, a sharp, broken sound that vanished into the stillness of the park. There were no houses nearby, no lights in the windows, no one to hear her. Don't make this harder, he whispered, dragging her toward a dark car parked under the trees. She kicked, scratched, begged. Her voice cracked from crying, but he didn't stop. Inside the car, the doors locked with a soft click. The world outside disappeared. The drive felt endless. Clara stared at the back of his head, memorizing every freckle, every grey hair. Her heart pounded so loud she couldn't hear anything else. She counted trees, signs, streetlights, but eventually there were no more signs, no more lights, just dirt roads and the hum of insects in the dark. The house he took her to looked abandoned, peeling paint, broken porch steps, windows covered with blankets. Inside, it smelled of mold and something else, something sour and metallic. He led her to a small room, pushed her in, and locked the door behind her. That was the first night. There was no bed, just a blanket on the floor. No light, just a crack under the door that let in a sliver of grey. Clara didn't sleep. She sat with her knees to her chest, shaking, praying, whispering Tyler's name like it was a shield. The days bled into each other. He didn't speak much. Sometimes he brought food, old sandwiches, crackers. Other times, nothing. She stopped asking questions, stopped trying to make sense of the hours. Instead, she scratched lines into the wall with her fingernail, one for each day she thought had passed. 7, then 12, then 20. She tried to remember her mother's voice, her laugh, but it all felt distant, like a show she'd once seen and forgotten the ending to. Sometimes he'd open the door and just watch her. Not speak, not move, just watch. That was the worst part. The waiting, the silence, the not knowing when or if it would end. Clara stopped crying, stopped screaming. The fear didn't leave, but it changed. It became something colder, harder. She wasn't hoping to be found anymore. She was thinking of how to escape. And though the voice inside her was small and cracked, it whispered one thing over and over: I will not die here. The floor was cold concrete, and Clara had long stopped trying to make it comfortable. The blanket he'd thrown in weeks ago was torn and smelled like mildew. Her legs were covered in bruises, some fading, some fresh. She didn't know what day it was anymore, only that she hadn't seen sunlight since the day she was taken. There was a small window near the ceiling, but it was covered from the outside. Sometimes she thought she could hear birds or a car in the distance, but mostly it was silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Clara had stopped speaking aloud. Her voice felt foreign. She used to hum to herself to keep the fear away. Now even that felt like a waste of energy. Her body ached from being curled up so long. Her stomach grumbled constantly. Some days he brought food, some days he didn't. Once he left the door unlocked. Just once. She'd tried to run, bolted down a hallway, found another door, locked, then another. The third one opened to the outside, and for a moment the night air hit her face like a slap. But he was there, waiting, smiling. He didn't speak, just grabbed her and dragged her back. After that, she stopped trying. She stopped believing she would ever get out. Sometimes she imagined Tyler was sitting with her. She'd close her eyes and picture him leaning against the wall beside her, making jokes about how bad the room smelled or how he'd totally beat this guy up if he was still alive. She'd whisper to the empty air, and sometimes, just sometimes, it felt like he whispered back. But then came the worst night. The night she woke up, and he was sitting inside the room, watching her sleep. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Her body froze with terror. She thought if she stayed still enough, maybe he'd forget she was real, but he didn't. He leaned close, whispered something she couldn't understand. Then he left. After that, Clara stopped sleeping altogether. Days passed, maybe weeks. The lines on the wall blurred together. Her thoughts grew fuzzy. She began hallucinating. Once, she thought she saw her mother outside the door, reaching for her. Another time, she thought the crack in the wall was a voice telling her to run. Her body grew weaker, but something else grew stronger, a kind of silent rage, not loud or dramatic, but steady, cold, focused. She began planning. Every time he brought food, she watched how he opened the door, noted how long it stayed ajar, which foot he led with, how he carried the key. She noticed he got careless. One day, he didn't shut the door all the way. She saw it bounce slightly. He didn't notice. That night, she stayed awake, heart pounding, waiting for the sound of his footsteps fading down the hallway. She counted to 300 just in case. Then she moved. Quietly, slowly, she pushed the door. It creaked. Too loud. She froze. Nothing. Then she pushed it open and stepped out. Every instinct screamed to turn back. But she kept going, down the hallway, past the rooms, past the kitchen that smelled like something rotten. She found the front door. It was locked. But a window to the side had a loose latch. She pushed. It gave way. She slipped out, falling into wet grass. And then she ran. No plan, no direction, just away. Her feet bled almost immediately on the rocks. Branches slapped her arms. Her heart thudded in her ears. She thought of Tyler, his voice, his laugh. She pictured him running ahead of her, daring her to keep up. She followed him. She didn't look back. She didn't stop. The sky was black, the moon faint behind clouds. She had no idea where she was or how far the road stretched. All she knew was that for the first time in what felt like forever, there were no walls, no locked doors. Just air and hope, small, fragile, flickering, but real. If any part of Clara's journey reminds you of someone, or maybe even yourself, take a moment to like this video. And if her voice stirred something in you, share yours in the comments. Sometimes healing begins with knowing we're not alone in what we feel. The wind bit at Clara's face as she moved through the darkness, her breaths shallow and uneven. Her legs burned, her feet were torn open, each step leaving behind tiny smudges of blood on the gravel. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. The night wasn't silent. It was alive. Crickets screeched, branches creaked, owls called out in the distance. Every sound made her flinch, made her glance behind her, half expecting to see his shadow stretching across the road. But no one came. She had escaped. Now came the harder part, surviving the escape. There were no houses, no signs, no lights, just an endless stretch of road and the dense woods pressing in from both sides. Her heart thudded in her chest, wild and uneven. But it was her own, and for the first time in weeks it wasn't racing from fear, it was racing from something else, resolve. She looked up at the sky. The clouds had shifted, revealing stars scattered like dust across the heavens. It reminded her of Tyler, how he'd once taken her outside during a power outage, made her lie in the grass, and told her, "No matter how dark it gets, there's always light up there. Just gotta look for it." She whispered his name now, letting the memory wrap around her like a coat. "Tyler," she said into the wind, "I'm still here," and somehow it helped. She started talking to him, out loud, telling him where she was, what she was doing, how scared she felt. It kept her grounded, kept her focused, because if she could talk, she could think, and if she could think, she could keep walking. Her thoughts drifted to her mother, Amy Reynolds, the overworked nurse who always came home exhausted, who didn't say, "I love you," often, but once stayed up all night holding Clara after a nightmare. Clara imagined her face now, creased with worry, aged by guilt, maybe holding a photo of her daughter and praying to a God she barely believed in. "I'm coming home, Mom," Clara said softly. "I promise." Every few feet she had to stop and catch her breath, leaning against trees or crouching in the grass. But she never let herself rest too long. Rest was a trap. Rest was the thing that let fear creep back in. So she moved. And with every painful step, something shifted inside her. She wasn't the same girl who had walked into that park weeks ago. That girl had been soft, naive, starved for love. This girl, she was sharp, focused, dangerous in her own quiet way. She had learned to survive a monster. Now she was learning to survive the aftermath. The road stretched on, the stars kept watch. The pain didn't stop, but neither did she. Because somewhere out there, past the trees and the dark and the cold, someone would help her. She believed that now, and more than that, she believed in herself. The headlights hit her like a wave of daylight. Clara froze in the middle of the road, arms crossed over her chest, eyes wide and half blind. She hadn't heard the car approaching over the pounding in her ears. For a moment she was sure it was him, that he'd found her, that this was the end. But the car stopped. A door opened. A woman's voice called out, "Sweetheart, are you okay?" Clara couldn't answer. Her lips trembled, her body swayed, and then she collapsed. The next hours were a blur. She woke up in a hospital bed, the smell of antiseptic sharp in her nose. Lights buzzed above her, wires connected to her arms. A nurse checked her pulse. A police officer stood in the corner. Her mom, her mother, was at her side, face pale, eyes swollen. She kept repeating, "I'm so sorry, baby, I'm so sorry." Clara didn't speak, not at first. There was too much to process. Too many things broken inside her. But she didn't cry either. She just listened to the hum of machines, to the careful words of the doctors, to the soft voice of the woman who had found her, Evelyn Moore, who came to visit every day after that. "You're safe now," she said. But safety didn't feel real yet. At night, Clara kept waking up. Every noise made her jump. She refused to sleep unless the lights were on. Nurses found her curled into a corner of the bed, knees to her chest, eyes open. That's when they brought in Dr. Karen Bishop. The psychologist didn't ask too much at first. She just sat nearby, drawing in a notebook, while Clara stared at the wall. Then one day, she handed Clara the notebook and said, "Draw something." Clara drew a locked door. Next session, she drew a key. Then a star, then Tyler. The drawings became her language, her way back into the world. Slowly, the words returned, in fragments, in whispers. But they came. After 2 weeks, Clara stood up from her bed and walked to the window without help. She watched the cars on the street below and didn't flinch when a siren passed. It was progress, tiny, but real. Her mother stayed at the hospital day and night. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just held hands. There were no perfect words, no magic to fix what had happened, but Clara didn't feel alone anymore. And in that fragile silence, something began to grow again. Not quite peace, but hope. Going back to school was the hardest part. Clara walked through the front doors of Jefferson Middle School with a backpack that felt twice as heavy as before. Everyone had heard the story. Whispers followed her through the hallways like shadows. Some kids stared. Others looked away. A few asked cruel questions in quiet corners. "Did he hurt you? Why didn't you just scream? Were you stupid enough to meet him on purpose?" Clara tried to tune them out, but the words stuck. She began eating lunch alone. spent recess in the library, stopped answering questions in class. Her teachers were patient, but pity filled their eyes, and that was somehow worse than cruelty. At home, she barely spoke. Her mother hovered too much, afraid to leave her alone, afraid to say the wrong thing. Sometimes they fought, sometimes they cried. Most nights Clara couldn't sleep. The nightmares had returned. She dreamed of locked doors, of footsteps in the dark, of screaming into silence. One night she climbed out of bed, walked into the kitchen, and stared at the drawer full of knives. She stood there for a long time, then she closed it. The next morning, she handed Dr. Bishop a sealed envelope. Inside was a note. "Sometimes I wish I didn't survive." Dr. Bishop didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She read the note and simply said, "Thank you for telling me." That's when the real work began. They met twice a week. Clara started journaling, not about what happened, but about how it made her feel, the fear, the rage, the shame. She filled pages with drawings and poems, tiny letters to Tyler, letters to herself. Over time, her voice returned. One day, Dr. Bishop asked her what she wanted. Not just to feel better, but truly wanted. Clara answered without hesitation, "I want to make sure no other kid feels like I did, like no one sees them." That day changed everything. She joined a small support group for girls who had survived abuse. At first, she didn't speak. Then slowly, she began sharing her story, her pain, her drawings. Other girls cried, others nodded, some even smiled. They called her brave, but Clara didn't feel brave. She just felt tired of being afraid. And that, in itself, was strength. She started speaking up more. At school, at home, in therapy. She began advocating for better online safety at school assemblies. She helped Dr. Bishop design a program that educated kids and parents about digital predators. She wasn't fully healed, but she was healing. Not despite what had happened, but because she had chosen not to let it define her. The auditorium was full, but Clara could barely hear the hum of the crowd. Her hands trembled slightly as she stood backstage, holding the microphone. Her heart pounded against her chest, like it had the night she ran barefoot through the woods. But this time she wasn't running away. She was stepping forward. It had been nearly a year since her escape. A year of therapy, relapses, quiet victories, and painful truths. She'd been asked to speak at her school's safety awareness assembly. At first she said no, then maybe, then yes. Now, here she was. Principal Lawrence gave a short introduction. He didn't say her name, didn't tell her story. He just said, "Today, someone brave wants to talk to you about something that matters." Clara stepped onto the stage. The lights were hot on her face. The crowd, students, teachers, even parents waited in silence. She took a breath. "My name is Clara Reynolds," she said. "You probably know who I am. You've heard things, whispers, rumors." She looked up, meeting their eyes. "Some of them are true." A hush settled over the room. "I was taken. I was kept in a room for weeks. I was tricked by someone pretending to be a friend." No one moved. "But that's not the part I want to talk about today." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "I want to talk about what came after. About waking up in the middle of the night shaking. About sitting in class, pretending to be okay while remembering what it felt like to be locked in the dark. About people asking questions that hurt more than the memory itself." Her voice cracked. She let it. "I want to talk about healing, and how it's not pretty. It's not fast. It's not something that happens just because you survive." She took another breath. Steadier now. Healing is messy. It's falling apart and putting yourself back together over and over. It's telling the truth when it's terrifying. It's choosing to live even when part of you doesn't want to. Someone in the audience wiped their eyes. She continued, "I used to think what happened to me would define me forever, that I'd always be that girl, the victim, the broken one." She stepped forward, eyes shining. "But I'm not just a survivor. I'm a fighter. I'm a sister. I'm an artist. I'm someone who got out and chose to come back stronger." A few people started clapping, then more. Soon the room erupted. Her mother stood in the back, hands over her mouth, tears streaming. Dr. Bishop sat beside her, eyes full of pride. Clara smiled through her tears. Later, backstage, a younger girl approached her, maybe 10 years old, holding a sketchbook. "Can I show you something?" the girl whispered. Clara nodded. The girl opened to a page, a drawing of a girl standing in the rain, holding a lantern. Above her were stars. "That's you," the girl said. Clara knelt down, touched the drawing with trembling fingers. "No," she whispered. "That's you." It was the first time she truly understood the power of her story. It wasn't just about pain, it was about light, about walking through darkness and becoming the lantern for someone else. In that moment, everything shifted. The fear didn't vanish. The memories didn't fade, but they no longer controlled her. She had taken them and turned them into something that could save someone else. That was her victory. That was her freedom. Clara once believed her silence kept her safe. Now she knew better. Her story had become more than a memory. It was a message, a reminder that monsters don't always hide in shadows. Sometimes they smile, sometimes they sound kind, and sometimes they wear the face of a friend. What happened to Clara was horrifying. But what she chose to do after was extraordinary. She could have hidden forever. She could have disappeared inside her trauma, let it swallow her whole. But instead, she faced it, bit by bit, tear by tear. And in doing so, she taught others something most adults never fully learn. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about reclaiming. Clara's story wasn't about weakness. It was about strength in its purest, rawest form. The strength to speak when your voice shakes. The strength to trust again after being betrayed. The strength to take one more step when your body begs you to stop. She reminded people, parents, teachers, friends, that protection starts with presence, with listening, with noticing when a child changes, when they withdraw, when their light dims, because sometimes what saves a life isn't a rescue, it's attention, it's belief, and above all, it's love, shown in the quiet, everyday moments that say, "I see you." 10 years later, Clara Reynolds stands in front of classrooms, not as a survivor, but as a mentor. She's now 21, studying psychology at the University of Missouri. Her dream of becoming a veterinarian transformed into something deeper, helping heal wounds that can't be seen on X-rays. She speaks at schools, shelters, and conferences, sharing her story not to relive the past, but to rewrite its meaning. Each time she tells it, she watches eyes widen, shoulders shift, hearts soften, because her voice carries what so many children never get to say. She also started a non-profit called Lantern Project, inspired by the drawing that little girl once gave her backstage. The project offers therapy access, digital safety education, and peer mentoring for kids who face trauma or abuse. Clara runs workshops where young survivors draw, write, and speak, not as victims, but as creators of their own healing. Her journal from those first months after the escape was published last year under the title The Road Back. It became a bestseller, not because it was perfectly written, but because it was heartbreakingly real. Amy, her mother, is now one of the most active volunteers in the organization. Together, they turned guilt into purpose. Clara didn't just survive. She became the light she once searched for. If you made it this far, it's because something in Clara's story reached you. Maybe it was her strength, maybe her silence, maybe the way she kept walking through the night, even when everything hurt. But now, it's your turn to walk. Not 10 kilometers through darkness, but a few simple steps that could mean everything to someone else. Think about the kids in your life, your child, your sibling, your student. Ask yourself, would I notice if they were fading? Would I be the person they felt safe enough to tell? Now's the time to look closer. Listen deeper, speak softer, and if this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Leave a comment. What would you say to Clara if she were your daughter? Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel and join us in telling stories that matter. Because sometimes one story can open someone's eyes, and sometimes it can save a life. The road may be long, but no child should ever have to walk it alone.